A shocked and devastated Diddy spotted at the home where his ex suddenly and mysteriously.
When she put out those pictures of the dude pulling his pants down, and it looked like some gay act that was going on, he got on the phone.
Every so often, Hollywood doesn't whisper secrets. It coughs them up in public. And when that happens, the room goes silent because everybody knows what's about to get ugly. That's exactly the energy that hit the internet the moment. Quincy Brown and 50 Cent became central voices in an explosive documentary tied to Kim Porter, with Diddy suddenly standing in the crosshairs. This wasn't a diss track. This wasn't an interview clip taken out of context. This felt like a vault door creaking open. The kind of reveal that makes people stop mid-scroll and mutter, "Oh, they're not playing." Allegations, implications, and long-buried dynamics surfaced with the confidence of something that's been waiting its turn. The shock wasn't just what was said, it was who was saying it and when. Because when insiders step forward in a project framed as remembrance, accountability suddenly becomes unavoidable. This didn't feel like gossip. It felt like a ledger being opened. Buckle up. Because once this documentary hit the internet, didn't debate whether it mattered. It asked one question: how much of this were we never supposed to see? Documentaries are supposed to look backward, not blow things up. They're meant to preserve memory, not challenge power. But the moment this project centered around Kim Porter surfaced with voices like Quincy Brown and 50 Cent, it became clear this wasn't just reflection. It was confrontation wrapped in archival footage and quiet truths. From the opening moments, the tone felt different, not angry, not accusatory, calm. And calm is always more dangerous. Calm suggests preparation. It suggests someone has waited long enough to stop yelling and start explaining. That's the energy that immediately set the internet on edge. Quincy Brown's presence alone shifted expectations. This wasn't an outsider speculating. This was someone who lived inside the family dynamic. Someone whose relationship with Kim Porter extended beyond public images and headlines. That proximity mattered, because it stripped away the ability to dismiss what followed as rumor. When people with lived experience speak carefully, audiences lean in. What Quincy offered wasn't explosive language. It was framing. He spoke about environments, power structures, and emotional gravity that didn't always align with the glossy narrative the public was fed for years. His words carried weight because they didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded considered. Like someone choosing precision over drama. Then the documentary widened its lens, and that's where the tension grew teeth. The story stopped being just about Kim's life and started being about the ecosystem around her, the expectations, the silences, the unspoken rules that come with proximity to power. And without naming names aggressively, the implications pointed in one clear direction. That's when Diddy entered the narrative, not through accusation but through absence. His presence was felt more in what wasn't said than in what was. The documentary didn't attack him directly. It did something far more unsettling. It questioned dynamics everyone had accepted as normal. The pacing mattered. Nothing was rushed. No dramatic music cues screamed "gotcha." Instead, viewers were guided through timelines that didn't quite line up, moments that felt unresolved, and decisions that raised eyebrows only when seen together. The effect was subtle but powerful. Audiences weren't told what to think. They were invited to notice. And when audiences notice things on their own, outrage becomes personal. Then came 50 Cent. And whenever he appears in a narrative like this, subtlety takes a back seat. But instead of ranting, he questioned. He mocked the idea that powerful figures are untouchable. He pointed out how stories get curated, how reputations are protected, and how silence often does more work than denial. His sarcasm landed like a spotlight, not because it introduced new facts, but because it reframed old ones. Suddenly, long-standing rumors felt less like gossip and more like questions that were never allowed to be asked publicly. And once those questions exist, they don't disappear. The internet reacted instantly, not with disbelief but with recognition. Comment sections filled with variations of the same sentiment. This explains a lot. That sentence alone is dangerous. It means people have been holding quiet doubts for years, waiting for permission to voice them. Media pages moved carefully. Headlines leaned on words like explosive, allegations, and claims, but avoided firm conclusions. That caution spoke volumes. Editors know when they're dealing with stories that don't end cleanly. What made this documentary hit harder than others was timing. Audiences are no longer willing to accept carefully maintained legends without scrutiny. The culture has shifted. Power is being questioned across industries, and this project landed squarely in that moment. Social media broke the documentary into clips, quotes, and reactions. Some praised Quincy for his restraint. Others applauded 50 Cent for saying what many felt but wouldn't articulate. Defenders of Diddy accused the project of exploiting tragedy and reopening wounds. The debate was immediate and polarized. But here's what nobody could deny. This didn't feel random. It felt intentional. It felt like something that had been building quietly behind closed doors until the conditions were right. Silence from Diddy's side only amplified speculation. Online silence is rarely interpreted as dignity. It's read as strategy, and when strategy is assumed, trust erodes further. Supporters urged patience. Critics called the quiet telling. The vacuum did exactly what vacuums do. It pulled attention inward. The documentary didn't end with answers. It ended with discomfort. And discomfort is the seed of every larger reckoning. Viewers weren't left with conclusions. They were left with questions about power, about memory, about who controls narratives when someone is no longer here to speak for themselves. By the end of the first viewing wave, the internet wasn't asking whether the documentary went too far. It was asking why so many things suddenly made sense. That shift matters. Because once a narrative changes from "this is shocking" to "this explains everything," there's no going back. This wasn't a takedown. This wasn't a tribute. It was a crack in a story people thought was sealed. And once a crack appears, everything behind it starts pressing forward. This wasn't the explosion. Once the documentary finished its first full viewing cycle, the conversation didn't slow down. It multiplied. What began as quiet discomfort turned into full-volume outrage, analysis, and side-taking that flooded timelines like a broken dam. This was no longer about a documentary. It was about what people felt they had been ignoring for years and suddenly couldn't unsee. The first shift was subtle but important. People stopped asking, "Is this true?" and started asking, "Why does this feel familiar?" That's the most dangerous phase of any scandal, because familiarity breeds belief. When viewers recognize patterns instead of isolated claims, the story takes on a life of its own. Clips of Quincy Brown began circulating everywhere, often stripped of context but heavy with implication. His calm delivery was dissected endlessly. People praised the restraint, pointing out that nothing sounded exaggerated or reckless. Others accused him of implying more than he said. But even critics admitted one thing: he sounded deliberate, not emotional. And deliberate speech carries authority whether people like it or not. Then came the amplification effect. Reaction channels rushed in, racing to be first, loudest, and most definitive. Every line from the documentary became a headline. Every pause became a theory. Every choice of wording was treated like it had been vetted by a legal team. Even when it hadn't, nuance didn't stand a chance. When 50 Cent entered the broader conversation through interviews, social media posts, and indirect commentary, the temperature spiked instantly. His trademark sarcasm reframed the discussion from remembrance to accountability. He didn't accuse, he questioned. And questioning power publicly is often more threatening than outright allegations. His commentary invited the audience to think differently about silence, about why certain narratives stay intact for decades, about how influence shapes what gets remembered and what gets buried. Whether viewers agreed with him or not, they shared his words aggressively because he said the quiet part out loud. Memes followed because the internet uses humor to process fear. Comparisons flew everywhere. People joked that this documentary made prestige TV dramas look fictional. Others said it felt like watching a family album slowly morph into a court filing. The jokes were funny but nervous. Laughter carried tension. Underneath it, defenders of Diddy mobilized quickly. They accused the project of exploiting Kim Porter's legacy to push narratives that couldn't be challenged directly. They pointed out that implication is not evidence and warned against turning discomfort into conviction. Their arguments weren't ignored, but they struggled to gain traction in a climate already primed to distrust power. Critics countered with one line that kept repeating across platforms. Nobody is saying this out of nowhere. That sentiment mattered. It suggested the documentary didn't create doubt. It validated doubt that had been quietly circulating for years. As the debate raged, old interviews resurfaced. Archived footage got recontextualized. Statements once dismissed as harmless suddenly felt loaded. The internet loves revisionism, and it wasted no time rewriting the past through a new lens. The conversation expanded beyond the people directly involved. Fans started discussing the entertainment industry as a whole, about how proximity to power reshapes behavior, about how silence becomes survival, about how narratives are protected until they're no longer useful. This wasn't just celebrity gossip anymore. It was systemic suspicion. Media outlets moved carefully but persistently. Coverage focused on reaction rather than conclusion, which spoke volumes. When journalists avoid definitive language, it's usually because they know the ground is unstable. Nobody wanted to be the outlet that declared a verdict too early. The most volatile element was the absence of a clear rebuttal. No immediate statement dismantling the implications. No direct counter-narrative addressing the themes raised. Silence became the loudest participant in the conversation. Supporters called it strategic restraint. Critics called it avoidance. Either way, the vacuum fed speculation. Public opinion hardened fast. Not into consensus, but into camps that no longer listened to each other. One side framed the documentary as overdue truth. The other framed it as irresponsible insinuation. Both sides accused the other of bias. And once discussions reach that stage, facts become accessories instead of anchors. What kept the fire burning was the documentary's refusal to offer closure. It didn't resolve anything. It opened doors and walked away. That unresolved feeling irritated audiences, and irritation fuels engagement. People wanted answers that didn't exist yet, so they filled the gap themselves. The legacy of Kim Porter became a central emotional pillar. Many viewers argued that her story deserved honesty, not protection of anyone else's image. Others said invoking her memory demanded care and restraint. That tension made the conversation deeply personal, not just sensational. By the end of this phase, the documentary had achieved something rare. It shifted how people talk. The names involved weren't being discussed the same way anymore. Language changed. Tone changed. Even neutral conversations carried a hint of suspicion. This wasn't a peak. It was a plateau. A new normal where certain questions were now acceptable to ask in public. The firestorm didn't need new information to keep burning. It fed on reinterpretation, silence, and the growing sense that something long settled was no longer settled. At all. And once that happens, no statement can put the genie back in the bottle. Because now the audience wasn't waiting to be told what to think. By the time the documentary stopped trending at the top of every feed, the real impact had already landed. That's how moments like this work. The internet yells first, then moves on, but the people involved don't get to scroll past what changed. They wake up inside it. For Diddy, the aftermath wasn't a dramatic collapse. There were no instant cancellations, no emergency press conferences, no cinematic downfall. What happened instead was quieter and far more dangerous. The narrative around him shifted. Not decisively, not unanimously, but enough to matter. The benefit of the doubt thinned. In public life, losing certainty is worse than losing popularity. Popularity can rebound. Certainty rarely does. Once audiences start adding a mental asterisk to your name, every future headline gets read differently. Neutral stories feel loaded. Silence feels intentional. Even success feels defensive. What this documentary did wasn't declare guilt. It introduced doubt with credibility. And credibility is the hardest thing to argue against because it doesn't rely on shouting. It relies on proximity, timing, and tone. The project didn't accuse loudly. It questioned calmly. That calm questioning echoed longer than any explosive allegation would have. For Quincy Brown, the fallout was complex in a different way. He emerged not as an agitator, but as a narrator who refused to sanitize memory. Supporters praised his composure and clarity. Critics accused him of implying too much without saying enough. But even critics struggled to dismiss him outright, because his connection to the story wasn't abstract. What stuck most was restraint. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't tour talk shows. He didn't escalate. That restraint made his words feel heavier over time, not lighter. In a media environment obsessed with instant reaction, quiet consistency reads as confidence. For 50 Cent, the moment fit neatly into a persona he spent years sharpening.
He didn't claim to be the moral authority.
He played the provocateur who asks uncomfortable questions and lets others argue over the answers. Supporters saw him as a truth teller. Detractors saw him as opportunistic. Neither label slowed the spread of his commentary, but even provocation has consequences. When you pull at threads this publicly, you don't control what unravels. You just decide whether you're comfortable watching it happen. And once threads are pulled, they don't neatly weave themselves back into the original pattern. The most significant impact wasn't on individuals. It was on perception. The way people talk about power changed. The way they talk about silence changed. The way they talk about legacy changed. The documentary reframed silence not as dignity, but as a choice with consequences. That reframing lingers. Media coverage cooled, but context didn't. Future articles didn't need to re-explain the controversy. Readers already knew. That's when stories become sticky. When they no longer need recaps to influence interpretation, behind closed doors, the industry adjusted. Not with announcements, but with math, risk assessments, reputation management. Conversations that start with, "Do we need to think about optics here?" That's how fallout actually works. Slowly, invisibly, relentlessly. The audience, meanwhile, split into a long-term divide. One group decided the documentary validated years of quiet suspicion. Another decided it crossed a line by implying what couldn't be proven. Both groups carried their conclusions forward, ready to apply them to every future development. That division didn't resolve. It calcified. And calcified opinions don't soften with time. They wait for reinforcement. What made this moment particularly lasting was the absence of closure. No definitive statement closed the book. No evidence slammed the door shut. No apology reset the tone. The story ended with questions, not answers. And unanswered questions are the most powerful drivers of future narratives. Kim Porter's legacy sat at the center of that unresolved tension. Many viewers felt the documentary honored her by refusing to flatten her story into something convenient. Others felt it risked turning remembrance into leverage. That disagreement itself ensured the conversation wouldn't disappear quietly. The internet moved on, as it always does. Another scandal took the spotlight. Another headline stole attention. But this story didn't vanish. It settled into the background, ready to resurface whenever familiar names reappeared in new contexts. That's the true aftermath, not outrage. Not vindication. reframing. From now on, moments that once passed without scrutiny will be examined. Decisions that once felt private will be questioned. Silence will be interpreted, not ignored. The lens has changed, and lenses don't revert. This wasn't an ending. It was a marker, a point in time where a carefully maintained story developed visible cracks, and people with proximity chose not to smooth them over anymore. Whether those cracks widen or get patched depends on what comes next. Statements, actions, time. All of it will matter more now. Because the audience is watching differently. And once the audience changes how it watches, the story never truly resets. If you're still here, let's be real. You didn't watch this for a soft tribute or a history lesson. You stayed because this story felt heavy, uncomfortable, and way too intentional to ignore. If at any point you paused and thought, this explains more than it says, then you caught exactly what everyone else did too. Now, do what the algorithm understands. And smash that like button like it's been protecting secrets for years. Because engagement is the only thing louder than silence. And don't sit there acting neutral. Drop your take in the comments. Was this long overdue accountability or a line that shouldn't have been crossed? Did the documentary expose? Truth? Or did it invite speculation without answers? Say it plainly. This comment section is where the real debate lives. If this is your first time here, understand the mission clearly. We don't wait for narratives to be approved on this channel. We break down the stories while they're still raw, still controversial, and still making powerful people uncomfortable. If you want front row seats to moments the industry would rather smooth over, hit subscribe right now before the next chapter drops unexpectedly. Turn on notifications too. Because the moment a statement gets released, a silence stretches too. Long or an old clip resurfaces with new meaning, we're already connecting the dots. Other channels recap headlines. We analyze the pressure points. Remember, today's Just a Documentary becomes tomorrow's How Did We Miss This? And when the next revelation surfaces, because stories like this never end cleanly, you'll want to be here, not scrolling confused in someone else's comments. This is Fame Blueprint, where legacies get examined, power gets questioned, and silence never gets a free pass.